mixed it with a color ramp. The factor of the color ramp is set to random. And how do you figure this out? If you keep Control Shift clicking on this, you'll go from location, which is all one color, to color, there is no color difference here, to alpha, to object index, this becomes black, to material index, to random. The slider determines how many of these are going to be here. So if I control click, let's say here, and if I make this color like blue, so you're going to have blue leaves in between as well. And when I render it, you see that it took only one. Om Namah Shivaya. Good morning, welcome back to In the Khud. This is 23rd September 2023, 11:33 AM, and in this video I have to document a few things. This is the progress that I made yesterday on the project. Why I chose not to use a particle system. I simplified the entire geometry nodes tree. Then how I added random color to the leaves of the tree, the main tree. How I have brought down the cycles render to an EV render now, and the same thing which is taking like 11 seconds to render inside cycles is getting rendered inside EV for like a couple of seconds, like 2 seconds. We'll see that render time as well. Honestly, I like the EV render more now than the cycles render, because as I said yesterday's video as well, the grass on the floor was having some weird black color shading issues in cycles, which is not the case in EV, so that's nice. And lastly, I'm going to talk about Premiere Pro and a text MoGuard situation which I ran into yesterday, and I'm going to fix that. No particle system. So yesterday I tried adding a particle system for the grass. Towards the end of the video I was like, probably this is the way to do, but turns out that it was taking with the particle system, it was taking my render times and cycles especially to like obnoxious amounts. So I just went. So I said, no, we're not going to do particle system. We're going to continue doing everything inside the geometry nodes tree. That's the second part, node tree simplification. So the way the node tree was yesterday was getting very difficult for me to navigate or make any sense out of anything. So what I did is I spent a good amount of time and I was listening to Moji all along. So that makes things a little easier. So you see that I've added a lot of join geometries in between, so that I don't have to have like cables going all the way from here to here. And I've removed the entire soil thing in between, because that was anyway not making any sense to have that additional layer of soil distributed. What I'm doing is I'm just trying to distribute things on this main ground itself in the rendered view. This is one thing, I'm not exactly sure why that is the case, but here the scene looks a lot darker, and when I render it, you see that it took only 1 second and 97. Yeah, I think it's fine. We anyway have to do like a lot of color correction, and not a lot of color correction, but the exposure and everything can be fixed inside After Effects with Lumetri. So I'm not really worried about the overall image looking very dark. So you see the render time is like only 2 seconds right now, which is amazing. But this is one thing with EV and geometry nodes systems, is that the viewport lag is a lot, especially in the rendered view. In solid view it's fine, but then you can't really understand what is going on because we're just using images for the trees. I removed the soil layer and I had 2 tree groups here. One was the foreground trees, one was the background trees. Initially, because I was having only 3D trees across my entire scene, I was like, maybe I could have the foreground trees which are actual 3D meshes instanced on those points, and in the background I could have same 3D meshes, but what I did is I decimated the life out of them to the point that they stopped looking like trees as well. So that's why I had those 2. But now, since everything is an image, like including these foreground trees, they're all images, and to me this just makes a lot more sense to do, because we are not actually ever going to take the camera and like go in. And even if we do, we have set up things in a way that, let me just shut the track to constraint on this. Even if we were to go inside here, we have set up things in such a way that you will not see the 2D part, like it will not be extremely obvious. But that's not the case. Like, you know beforehand, before going into the scene, that this scene I'm actually removing all sorts of camera movement completely. So that simplifies your scene to a great extent, because why do you want 3D trees in the scene if you are not going in that depth or in that space? We still have trees stay above ground, so that for that we're using raycast. I did a lot of this, that I came into these nodes and I press Ctrl H, so that hides these unused nodes, and that helps in simplifying. Especially this is not that big a node tree, but it starts to get really complicated and it's very difficult for you to like navigate and understand what's going on. So yeah, I just added a ton of join geometries in between, And I removed all those things, like I was trying to scale instances earlier, and in my previous file I had kept all of those nodes here which were like basically not used. So I removed all of the unused nodes, and I think this is a lot more navigatable, if that is a word. So that's done. Random color leaves, this is interesting. So if you look at my main tree, which is actually a 3D mesh because I'm going to rotate it in Z, the tree has one thing is I've done a lot of color correction to match it with this image, because those images, 3D images, I rendered them out in cycles, and this whole thing is in Eevee. So that's a bit of a thing. I had to do a lot of color correction to match this, and even now it doesn't quite, it does like stand out a little bit, which is what we want to do anyway. So I want to show a little bit about the shading here, like how do you get that thing. So the thing that is being instanced on this main tree, which is a GeoNodes tree, is leaf, single leaf. So tree, single leaf, this one. So initially when I was trying to do it inside of inside of Eevee, I was getting a lot of weird white color shadows everywhere, right? And that turned out because this thing here which I was using, let me open that, the original leaf, the orange tree leaf one that I was using, that seemed to have like a, when I was like making the selection, there was this white fringe, and when you take that and instance it, like put that as the material, you get like that white kind of shading everywhere. Let me try and see if I can show that. So orange tree leaf one, which when this was selected, now over here you don't quite see it to the extent that earlier was visible, like there were real white patches and stuff, but now it's kind of fixed. So basically what I did is I took it into Photoshop, again made a selection and reduced the radius, shifted inside, so that white fringe went away, and we went from this to this, no white fringes. Okay, how do you add that random color variation? So you basically plug this with a mapping node and everything. This leaf texture is primarily going into your base color, so this was like this initially, okay, before adding anything else. This is just your image texture plugged right into it. I've taken that color, that image, and plugged it into an RGB curves. This is for like overall color correction, and I have mixed it with a color ramp. The factor of the color ramp is set to random. And how do you figure this out? If you keep Control Shift clicking on this, you'll go from location, which is all one color, to color, there is no color difference here, to alpha, to object index, this becomes black, to material index, to random. And so when you go to random, you see that there are black and white values here, the grayscale spectrum, which means that we can plug in a color ramp in between and have whatever colors that we want to have here. So if I Control Shift this now, you see what I've done is basically I've added two colors that I want to use, and I've put this to constant. So if I was to take this, and the slider determines how many of these are going to be here. So if I control click, let's say here, and if I make this color like blue, so you're going to have blue leaves in between as well. And again, sliding this around will determine how many. So this color goes into the color A, and color B is the bottom one, the image texture with the curves for color correction, and that result is something I've plugged into base color. And let me put the BSDF into surface again. So basically what we're doing is taking the original image texture and we're mixing it with this color situation. So we also have that leaf texture and the color part happening. Again, you want to increase the number of yellow leaves, you can just bring this up or bring this down. The reason I'm telling this is because the way this whole thing is working is through geometry nodes. So these leaves are basically instances on the branch thing, which is why none of these work. Like if these were separate individual objects, like a huge collection with like 21,000 leaves, which is something I was trying to do at one point, then I think probably object index would work. In that case, you would get like a different color for everything. But here random works, so that's what the documentation is for. Also, one more thing you would notice is they're not like completely flat. There is like some normal information. So by default, they just look like an image. So what I did is I just added a Voronoi texture into the bump and brought its strength down. I know this is not like the most ideal texture on a leaf, but I think it gets the job done. Anyway, you're going to see it from far, so it's not going to be super in focus. And the Eevee render is something that I've already discussed. Along with this project, because obviously I did not share this render yesterday, because the whole, like I'm still trying to figure the 3D part. I still have to do the deform part where I take a frame from this animation and put it into deform and change the prompts like they want them to be. happening. So that's something I have to work over the weekend. The second thing I started working on was a simple video edit, and that's where I was like, there needs to be some changes to my Premiere Mogarts that I've made. So there is this very simple, mute all the audio. There's this very simple video where there is two, let's say, text that is coming on, and I've made a Mogart already called ramp up opacity. If I go into my Essential Graphics and see this ramp up opacity, this has design controls in it, like you can change the, and this is a problem with Adobe, that you cannot have, like you cannot select this part and just make it something else. It will not work. It will make the whole thing that, and that is such a pain. Like why don't you just add this functionality, Adobe? I'm not going to try, and I'm not ranting about that right now. I'm just trying to express a bit of frustration. So definitely you have to like manually add these two layers here, right? And then do it. Like for the bottom one, I've used simple typewriter, which is like words just coming on like this. Let me go to this, make it just a little bigger. So for the first one, that is ramp up opacity. I think it's based on characters or what. So there are design controls where you can change the font and everything, and there are duration controls, like you can change the in duration, how fast it's coming in or stuff. I've also added a fade out, so like after, instead of like because I want both of them to fade out, so then out from is 4 and now duration is 1. This is based on words. I can also make it based on characters, so then you get a different sort of animation. You can even make it line so that the whole line will come together. Now the functionality I want to add here is when you say out from or fade out, if I take the bottom one, is calculating the seconds based on the start of this thing here. So when I say for this one out from 5 seconds, it's not considering this sequence time as 5 seconds. It's going to take 5 seconds from the start of this. So what I want to do is I want to have because right now the animation just starts from the first frame no matter what. I want to have an ability to start the animation from a certain minutes and seconds and then end at a certain minutes and seconds, which is something which I can figure. And then what I will do is I will ideally have all of these here and then just start this one over here. And so when I say fade out from, I can add the same value for both of them. So both of them are fading out from 4 seconds because everyone is starting from this point. These are the kind of hacks that you have to kind of do right now. But this, I feel with a little bit of work from my end, can like making this Mogart. Also what I want to do is I don't want to have like separate Mogarts because it doesn't make sense. I just have a drop down which says do you want to ramp up opacity or you want to do a simple typewriter, or there are a few more that I've made. I don't have all of that functionality in one cohesive Mogart. The alternative to this is going into After Effects and then trying to take the audio there and then with dynamic link trying to make those text animations. And that is fine, it doesn't take a lot of effort, but being able to do it right inside Premiere is just saves you a lot of mental trauma, so to speak. So that is that. Pretty much documented everything that I wanted to be. I think this is the crispest I have recorded a video on In the Khud in the past few months, I would say, because I've just been hitting record and trying to figure things out on the go. I have to start working on short films and like cartoon animations and stuff. That's like a real strong urge at the moment. I don't really know what but I will probably figure out how to do that. And along with that, as I said in like day before yesterday's video, Autodesk 3ds Max is something that I have to figure out. Thanks so much for being in the Khud. I'll catch you tomorrow. Peace.